Okay, today we're making lamb shank ragu. Lamb shanks are joints of meat from a sheep, and they are incredibly tough to eat in this state. They're full of muscle, they're full of sinew and fat, which means in order to make this a really nice edible dish, and once it is cooked, it's absolutely beautiful, you have to cook it slowly over a long period of time using the method of cookery of braising, which we're going to be doing today. Braising is a moist method of cookery. We have two methods, dry and moist. So braising is a moist method of cookery, and it's a slow braising, a slow boiling with lots of flavours which have been added to the boiling liquid through a mirepoix of vegetables of carrot, celery, onion, a bouquet garni of herbs, fragrant herbs. We'll use some tomato paste, some fresh tomatoes, and some garlic. We'll add flavour to that liquid. And this is going to actually braise over a period of about 4 hours. And after that 4 hours, the muscle, the sinew, and the fat will completely break down in this, and this meat will actually fall off the bone, which will be incredibly delicious and soft. So once again, braising is a moist method of cookery. It's used for to slow cook tough joints of meat. It's used to tenderize and break down tough muscle tissue, such as those found in shanks. The first step in making the lamb shank ragu is gathering all my mise en place together. So first off, I've set up my bench top with rubber mats underneath my chopping boards to make them nice and stable so they don't slip around. I've gathered all my ingredients nicely. So the ingredients for the lamb shank consist of a few things. First off, we have our vegetables, which are our mirepoix, which are our flavour, and it's also going to be part of the body of the final sauce. So we have about 6 carrots, 8 stems of celery, 4 onions. Those 3 ingredients are all going to be brunoise, so fine dice. We have the body or the flavouring of our sauce, which will include crushed garlic, about 4 tablespoons, 6 tablespoons of tomato paste for thickness. We have 4 400 gram tins of tomato puree. We have 750 mils of red wine. I prefer to use Merlot as it is quite sweet and it's going to add a sweetness to the sauce. And we have 2 litres, can't quite see it here, but there's 2 litres of beef stock. The other ingredient which we're going to use is 6 lamb shanks, and they're in the fridge at the moment, and a bit of flour which will just coat the lamb shanks when we pan fry them. The first step in making my sauce is actually doing the cutting preparation, and that is the brunoise of all of my vegetables. So the brunoise the celery, brunoise the carrot, and brunoise the onion. Now, brunoise is a very fine diced vegetable. It's a very specific slice or cut. It measurements of 3mm by 3mm by 3mm cubes. So it's a very fine dice. So I'm going to demonstrate at the moment how to do a proper brunoise, a brunoise of carrot, celery, and brunoise onion. Now, brunoise being a very fine dice of 3mm by 3mm. So to do this perfectly, I'm just going to size up my celery. Now the celery is already quite a thin piece of vegetable, so all I'm going to do is basically julienne that vegetable at 3mm intervals in slices, then just get that celery in lengths and do 3mm cuts straight down through the celery to create a very fine brunoise dice. I'm going to use my half moon to scrape up my celery from my bench and place it into my container. So brunoise of carrot is a bit more difficult because it does have rounded edges. So the first thing we have to do for brunoise of carrot is just chop off the ends. Discard those into our scrap bowl. Cut into a certain length, an easier length to manage. And the first thing we have to do is actually just square up our carrot. So to square up the carrot, I'm basically going to remove those rounded edges, just by slicing straight down. Try not to discard too much carrot to create a nice trunk. Then once I have that, I place it down on my board, the largest surface area touching the board so it's nice and stable, and do 3mm slices. Once I've done those 3mm slices, I can pile them back on top of each other, like so. Hold them down and do 3mm slices again. Once I've done that, join them up, 3mm cuts straight through them all the way along to achieve a perfect fine dice. Absolutely perfect. So scrape them up off my board using the half moon into my wooden container. And the last one, brunoise onion. Now brunoise onion is the most common type of brunoise, so we can use this in all our sauces. First thing you do is you remove the top of the onion, just slice straight through into the bin. Now the reason I've actually chosen to do the onion last is it's because it has such a strong flavour, it will add flavour to the board itself, and will actually add that flavour to my other vegetables, which I don't really want at this stage. So it's very important that you leave the core of the onion on. The core is the where the root system is. That is actually going to hold all the onion together. But I do slice straight through that, cutting the onion in half, and then I'm just going to peel off that skin. Just like so. Okay. So once I've done that, what I'm actually going to do is cut horizontally into the onion from the side that I've sliced down. So I want to cut straight through these, starting from the bottom, working my way to the top of the onion, going at 3mm intervals all the way up. So I get myself right down so I can see clearly, and I do my first slice, and I go all the way in, stopping just a few millimeters from the core. If I cut through that core, the whole onion will fall apart and defeat the purpose of this cut. Once again, keep going all the way up, 3mm each time, and I get 4 slices out of that one. So as you can see, I've got my cuts here, 4 there. Then I turn it facing me now, and I cut horizontally straight down, but not slice at 3mm intervals, but making sure not to slice all the way to the core, just staying back from the core that few millimeters so it holds together well. Making sure I go all the way along, remove those bits that fall off. So now I've got my horizontal cut, my vertical cut at 3mm. Now I'm just going to slice through that onion to create the perfect brunoise. Remove the core. And now I have my brunoise. And that is how you brunoise onion. And am I crying? You bet. Okay, so now that I've got my brunoise, carrot, celery and onion. This is the mirepoix flavour of my base. So the carrot is going to add sweetness to my sauce. The celery is going to add a saltiness to my sauce, and the onion is going to add a bitter, beautiful flavour to my sauce once it's cooked and browned. Also sweetens it and helps thicken the sauce as well, would you believe? So now I'm going to make my bouquet garni. A bouquet garni is a bundle of aromatic herbs. So the purpose of a bouquet garni is to add flavour to a sauce. So we're going to be doing a lamb ragu. So we're going to be needing to add a lot of flavour to our stock and our herbs and our vegetables in the way of herbs. So in our bouquet garni, we're going to be adding quite a bit of thyme. Thyme is a very woody herb, okay? And we're going to be adding some fresh flat leaf parsley. So to make a bouquet garni, all you do is you basically add these together. We're just going to fold them up into a bundle. So like I said, it's a bundle of aromatic herbs. I get some butcher's string. Butcher's string is a waxy string which can be used in cooking. I'm just going to wrap that butcher's string very, very tightly around my herbs. What that does is it keeps it together. The whole purpose of this bundle of herbs is at the very end, I'm going to take it out and just throw it in the bin. All right, the flavours as the meat simmers over the 3 hours is going to release from these herbs and really flavour that sauce lovely. So I just tie a tight knot there, tie it up, and I can also wrap this in muslin cloth. Muslin cloth is a very fine cotton cloth to hold it all in, but I actually want some of those thyme leaves to fall off into my sauce. It's really going to add a bit of flavour to it, really lovely. Now the last step in my mise en place for the lamb ragu is to actually flour the lamb shanks. Now I'm going to be sauteing, pan frying these lamb shanks over a direct heat, and to protect the flesh, okay, I'm actually going to take each lamb shank and really fold that nicely into flour. Now what that does is it helps with the browning of the shank, and also is going to help to thicken the sauce while it's cooking. So I'm going to do that to all 6 shanks, and then I can take these over and I can start to pan fry them. So now I'm going to start the process of actually making my lamb shanks. So what that involves is I'm going to saute off my vegetables. So first thing I'm going to do is take my pot and I'm going to turn on my flame. Now I'm using a large pot, so of course I'm going to use the large burner in order to make this dish. Just like if I was to use a small pot, I would make sure I was using the smallest burner. So on nice and high, as I want to saute my vegetables. I'm going to add some butter, about 80 grams of butter, and the same amount of oil. Now adding oil and butter together means the butter's actually not going to burn as quickly in the sauteing of my mirepoix vegetables. So I'm just going to wait for that butter and oil to heat up. Okay, the pan's nice and hot now, you can see why it's smoking a bit. So I'm going to start to add my vegetables. So I'm going to start with my onion. Put on my onion out. Celery. And carrot. So I just want to saute those 3 vegetables. Now sauteing is stirring and cooking over a high, dry heat. So saute, these are going to turn translucent after about 2 minutes of cooking. So that is the saute consistency that I want with these vegetables. So at this point my vegetables have become quite soft, and now I'm going to add some of my flavour to this. The flavours which I'm adding are, we're going to add our garlic and our tomato paste. So once you've added our tomato and garlic paste, it's important that you cook out the garlic and tomato paste. Now, tomato paste, if you don't cook it out, it'll actually add a floury flavour to the sauce. So I've really got to cook that tomato paste for a further 2 to 3 minutes, stirring it right the way through our ragued vegetables. Now that sauce is getting quite nice and thick. I can smell that the tomato paste is being cooked quite thoroughly. So at this point we're going to start to add my liquid to make the sauce. Okay, so our liquid consists of our tinned tomatoes, our 2 litres of beef stock, and just stir that through. So now we have a very rich sauce. So the next step in my dish is actually pan-searing the lamb shanks so they become nice and seared on the outside, and that searing is going to keep in the meat juices so it helps tenderize. So I'm going to start by putting a bit of oil in my pan, about 2 tablespoons. Just going to let my pan heat up, and as that heats up, I'm just going to move that oil around. So once that heats up, I'm going to take my shank, that should be fine now. I'll do 2 at a time. So I've got the flour on there. Now I'm going to let that cook quite quickly, let that brown and burn on each side. Okay, that's going to add a lot of flavour. And as that cooks, it's going to seal in those nice juices. I'm going to put that straight into my sauce and let that cook away. Okay, so now that I've got all of my my lamb shanks into the pot, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take some of my red wine. I'm going to turn the heat off and just gently deglaze my pan with my heat. I'm going to pour that sauce directly into the pan. Now what that deglazing does is actually takes all the burnt bits of meat, the lovely juices from the pan, and instead of throwing those lovely flavours away, just going to add them into my sauce. So I pour the remaining of my red wine, my Merlot, into my sauce, stir it through, so I've got my lovely lamb shanks in there now. And now those shanks are going to braise in that sauce for about 3 hours. It does take quite a long time. But once it's done, you'll see a beautiful, beautiful meat come off those shanks. And we'll reduce that sauce down. So there are 2 remaining steps to take care of while this is actually simmering away. One thing is that we've got to actually skim off all this fat that rises to the top while the sauce is simmering. So what we do is we get a ladle and we just start from the center and we swirl the ladle around, and what that does is it pushes the fat to the edges of the pan, and then once it's at the edges we can use our ladle and run our ladle along, just slowly sinking it in to gather up all that excess scum and fat. Alright, removing the fat means that the sauce itself will be less cloudy, it'll have a nicer mouthfeel, won't feel as greasy and as fatty on the tongue. So we just remove all that fat scum. Once again, swirl the pan. Put in all that fat. Okay, so you'll actually have to do that several times throughout the process, so probably every 20 minutes to half hour the fat will gather on top and you just come over and scoop it out. So now this is just going to simmer away. I'm just going to give it a quick stir so you can see the lamb shanks just sitting in the sauce. Okay, so it's going to simmer away for that 3-hour period. Now that it has come to a simmer, this is the point where I can add my bouquet garni. So I'm just going to take my bouquet garni, place it on top, and just submerge it into the sauce. Now that's just going to add fragrance, add aroma and flavour over the 3-hour period. So don't forget to come back, skim, stir, make sure it doesn't stick to the bottom as well, we don't want it to burn. Okay, and that should be done for a while. So the lamb shanks have been reducing and cooking and braising in their sauce now for just over 3 hours, about 3.5 hours. So it's now time to take them off. I've skimmed them every 20 minutes to remove the fat and the scum. I've stirred it, and now that the sauce has actually been reduced by about 1/3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fish out each of my shanks, and as you can see, I'm going to pull it up and have a close look to you, the meat has actually shrunken away from the bone. And you'll see in a minute that the meat is actually going to tear very easily off that. So I'm just going to put each of the 6 shanks into my tray here. So you can tell the meat's already falling off, look at that, it's just beautiful. Now I'm being very careful with all this. There's going to be things in here that I need to actually find and discard. So there are a few bay leaves, bouquet garni, they are going to need to be thrown away. However, the vegetables of the onion, the carrot and the celery, I'm going to strain them out because I actually want to use them later on as a part of the sauce. I'm going to make that part of the sauce. So I've pulled those out. Now I have just an empty saucepan. I have a colander. I'm going to take my sauce. I'm going to pour that into the colander. So I need to separate these elements. What I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the liquid because that is my sauce. I'm going to keep that and reserve that to the side. That's going to be used as the liquid element of my sauce. So that's going to go into a pasta. Then there's the bulk, the body of my sauce, which is going to be the lamb shank meat. I'm going to pull it off the bone and shred it. It's going to have a beautiful pile of meat. And then I'm going to fold that through with these leftover vegetables from the braising. So that's going to be the body of the sauce. And then the remaining, which will be our bouquet garni, which you can see here, was pulled out, and will go in the bin. So just bear with me as I strain the rest of this sauce. So as you can see, I've got my beautiful sauce there. So I'm going to start pulling out the bouquet garni. Alright, so a lot of the, you can see here the stems are quite bare on the thyme. That's because the thyme has fallen off into my sauce, which is exactly what I want to happen. I'm going to pull out the bay leaves, which I added in about halfway through. I didn't get to show you doing that. I added in about 6 to 8 bay leaves, and the bay leaves just going to add some extra flavour into that sauce. But bay leaves are inedible, so you have to make sure that you do remove them all. So keep stirring to drain that liquid through. So as you can see, as the liquid drains through, we have a beautiful, lovely and thick sauce appearing. So I've got my beautiful brunoise of vegetables, which has been cooking away. Now, as I said, that is the body of the sauce. So you can see how thick that is. The next part of my sauce I have is my beautiful braising liquid. It is lovely and thick, as you can see here. It's not thin at all. So that braising liquid will be added to my pasta as I'm cooking my ragu. Beautiful. And then I'm going to have my shanks. So next part, I'm going to pull apart the meat from my shanks. So we're now after the final stage of making our ragu, which is actually shredding the meat off our bones. So what I'm going to do is, using 2 forks, one for the start, I'm just going to pull the meat, holding onto the bone with the tongs. I'm going to pull the meat straight off the bone. Look at that. So it just peels away very, very easily. That's the sign of that they're cooked perfectly. And that is just sinew, fat and bone. That goes away in the bin. So I'm going to do that to all of my shanks. Just get all the meat off. Takes no time at all. So remember that these shanks were very tough, they were very hard, they were just a very thick muscle. And I told you that once the braising happens, so after several hours, it really breaks down the meat, the sinew, the fat, and the muscle, till it becomes a beautiful, lovely texture. So just pulling off all that meat. Now is I'm going to get, using 2 forks, I'm going to pull apart the shank, revealing any fatty sinew parts or veins or tendons. So this part here, having a close look at it, it's a sinew or a vein. Okay, so I don't want that. That is not very edible. It's not very nice. You can eat it, but would never want to serve that to somebody. So I just throw that in the bin and I keep pulling apart. So as I shred it, shredding into bite-sized pieces, just comes apart beautifully. So shredding. Once again, I found a piece of sinew that I would not want to eat. This only takes a few minutes to do. It's worth the effort. You really get a beautiful result. At the end here, this is a part of a tendon which was attached to a muscle. Okay, so it's actually clear and see-through. That is very chewy and inedible. So all we do is we get our edge of our fork and just disconnect that, pull the beautiful meat away from it, that it is edible. What we're left with is the chunky part in the bin. So this is what we're doing. We're separating the edible parts from the inedible parts. Majority of it is edible. It's lovely, but we're just going to make our way through it. There's another sinewy part that goes in the bin. So what we're left with now is perfectly shredded shank meat. Every single piece of this meat is purely appealing. There's no one's going to get a mouthful of sinew, a mouthful of fat, or a mouthful of a tendon. Okay, so every part of this is edible, which means your guests will enjoy their food and not have to worry about eating something unpleasant. It's nothing worse than biting into a dish and almost having to spit something out onto the side of your plate because you disliked it. You spend the rest of that dish eating it, worrying that you're going to get something else that you don't like. So into my tray, I'm going to put that beautiful shank meat. Move my chopping board to the side. So when I have my shank meat, I have my vegetables, and I have my sauce. So what I actually want to do now is get my vegetables. I'm going to gradually incorporate that into my meat because I do not want too much vegetables. I want to have the right amount of consistency of vegetables to meat. So I'm going to gradually add that in, give it a stir. Okay, so I really have a beautiful consistency there. Nice even. A little bit of vegetables left. And then to that, I will add my sauce.